Hello, property nomads. Hope you're doing well. You probably know by now that we have a Labour majority here in the UK, and that as a result of the recent King's speech, they're going to be doing quite a lot of things moving forward. And of course, being a property nomads channel, I'm not going to go off on a rant about renationalising the railways. I'm sure that's going to be quite entertaining, though. And in fairness, there are some things in the King's speech that are good, some things that are not so good. Another thing that is not very good, that's being lauded as being very good, was Great British Energy, but might do that in a different video. The purpose of this video is that, as we've spoken about before and other people in the property industry have spoken about before, Labour have vowed to end no-fault evictions for renters. However, the issue with that is that there could be another landlord exodus if there is no court reform to go with that. So Labour have come in and effectively said, this is what we're going to do. But they really, like most politicians, have had no thoughts into how that might affect the very people that they're trying to protect. So it doesn't take a genius to work out that Labour are very pro-renter. So anything that the renter says it does, it's like the sun shines out of their backside. We must support the renters. And, I'm all for that if the system's fair. At the moment, the system's not quite fair. But for a party that is for the people and wants to protect people, what they're not thinking about, in my opinion, is the economics of this. So if you end no-fault evictions, then that means it's very difficult to get tenants out, practically impossible, because the court system is not very good or very slow to get a tenant out. So whilst I appreciate there are bad landlords and there are good landlords, there are also bad tenants and good tenants. Now, if Labour are doing this because they want to keep rents low and all of that sort of stuff, then this will backfire, because not reforming the court system to deal with rental evictions, etc., whilst ending no-fault evictions, that could mean that landlords decide to leave. Landlords decide to leave, or go back to basic economics. The supply of rental housing dramatically decreases. Demand will remain the same. Therefore, prices go up. Anyway, we've got this article to look through. And as we've just said, the King's speech did confirm that the government will bring forward a renters' right bill to end Section 21 no-fault evictions. So basically, Section 21 at the moment is if you want your home back or you want your property back, the tenant might not have even done anything wrong. It's just a notice to say, yeah, not your fault, but I want my property back. Thank you very much. Here's your notice. Now, of course, the previous government decided they were going to do it, then they weren't going to do it, then they were going to do it, and then they didn't do it. Surprise, surprise. So they just passed the buck over to the Labour Party, and fair play, they're actually doing something about it. So the unfinished legislation has been passed over. King Charles said, and I quote, legislation will be introduced to give greater rights and protections to people renting their homes, including ending no-fault evictions and reforming grounds for possession, end quote. So I would hope that if we are ending no-fault evictions, then it is introduced alongside other parts of a renters reform bill that makes the system fairer. Now, the system at the moment isn't great, but it seems to do the job. The issue with Section 21s is that people like to complain about them. And I can say this from being sat on both sides of the fence. From a landlord point of view, you want that consistency of the rent coming in. You want the consistency of having good tenants and good properties. So I'm all for that. But then when I put my tenant hat on, some people will keep them up all night because of anxiety issues or whatever. And when I was renting years ago up in Hull, you do get that feeling that at any point you could get served with a notice. Now, luckily, we again had good landlords, good property, we were good tenants, not an issue there. We stayed there for 4.5 years. But I understand that every situation, every person, every landlord is different. But putting my tenant hat on, yes, I can see why you would not want a Section 21. And so getting rid of it would be a good thing, because then it might give you a bit more certainty. But then the challenge then becomes, as we're seeing with this article here, the challenge then becomes, what if you then get a bad tenant? A bad tenant that doesn't pay their rent, a bad tenant that trashes the home? Then what are you meant to do as a landlord? Because if your Section 21 is taken away and there are no major changes in the renters reform bill, then you're sat there paying, I would imagine, a higher mortgage rate now. And that's not good for anyone, because you're not getting the rent in, that's not paying your bills. That puts you in, as a landlord, in a difficult position. And if that becomes a situation where that is that tenable, that you then have to sell your property or your portfolio, then again, that impacts the renters in a negative way, because supply goes down, demand remains the same, prices go up. We'll see. Anyway, back to the article. So yes, this in the renters reform bill, what we're likely to see, tenants given the ability to challenge rent increases, ending of bidding wars, and then it will also introduce the same decent home standard that applies in the social housing sector, and also ensures that landlords don't discriminate against tenants in receipt of housing benefits or with pets or children. Now, let's tackle those 3 points bit by bit. So, decent home standard that applies in the social housing sector. Again, nothing's perfect. I've seen multiple arguments, debates of really bad social housing sector properties. I remember there was a couple of councils that I won't name who are not famed for their social housing. I put it that way. And some of the videos and scenes that I remember seeing back in the day from this particular council that may or may not be in Humberside, not very good at all. So social housing sector, decent home standard, okay. Having a bit of red tape there could be okay. It depends then exactly what is required. If it's things like, as should be normal, you must have a valid EPC, your gas safety's got to be done once a year, that's the law anyway. Then introducing the mandatory electrical safety certificate checks for every 5 years. Now, if that's the sort of stuff we're talking about, yeah, I'm all for that. Safer housing, better housing, works for everyone. I'm okay for that. That's fine. Challenging against rent increases, again, that can be quite challenging itself, because if you're looking at the supply and demand of housing, if things go up with the rate of inflation, then that can go up quite considerably. Please don't believe the CPI figures or the CPI figures when you're getting told inflation is 2 or 3%, because that's really not the case. Find out when you next try and renew your insurance, and then you'll find out that inflation is definitely not at a couple of percent. Landlords will also ensure landlords don't discriminate against tenants in receipt of housing benefits or with pets or children. Well, let's go to the housing benefits first. From my experience in housing itself, sometimes it is actually the mortgage company that has the issue and not necessarily the landlord, because I'm sure as most landlords, they want to get a good tenant into a good property, and sometimes a good tenant, just because you are on housing benefit, that doesn't make you a bad tenant. You can get some fantastic tenants that are on housing benefits. Absolutely wonderful. But through my experience, I've found it's actually the mortgage companies that don't like that. So that's probably a question for either your mortgage company or your mortgage broker to get a product that might work well for all parties involved. Again, don't believe that landlords should be discriminating against tenants that are in receipt of housing benefits, but I understand that that does happen out there, and it is what it is. And finally, not discriminating against tenants with pets or children. Now, there was a study done a few years ago about the positive impact that pets had on the length of tenancy. So apparently, if you do have pets and or children, it's likely to increase the amount of time that you're in a rental property. Now, I'm not sure if that's still the case now, but it certainly was a couple of years ago. actually pre-COVID, I should say. And myself and Aaron, we're an advocate of pets, and we're an advocate of tenants having children. Absolutely fine, great. Because normally it means they'll be in the home for longer. And once you get a settled tenant that pays on time, what more do you want from a landlord? You want someone that's going to be able to do that, look after your home. We do what we can in our end to maintain our side of the bargain, and therefore happy days. Now, with pets, for example, that's where you want a good AST, where you have something in there along the lines of, if there are any pet related issues, i.e. You need to do an extra deep clean at the end of the tenancy, or there are fleas as a result of your pet bringing them into the home, or anything like that. As long as you've got something in your AST that says that it's the tenant's responsibility to pay for it, then there's no issue with pets at all. I think what sometimes people have an issue with is if pets are brought in, and then that's led to a situation where the pet has fleas or whatever it might be, and then the tenant complains and the landlord has to pay for it. Now, I don't agree with that at all. We've been stung by that before. I don't agree with that whatsoever. Again, put it into your AST, any pet related issues. So if your pet chews the wall, whatever it likes doing, or again, if it brings fleas in, any refurb figures, anything like that, that then has to be paid by the tenant, not a problem. Same with children. Again, children like to draw things on walls, etc., etc. Same principle applies. Again, don't see why you would discriminate against people that have pets or children, but I understand that does go on. So all these things, we'll see what happens. We'll keep you up to date as best as we can, but that is the Labour wanting to end no-fault evictions for renters. We'll see what happens, because, as I said, without having some form of court reform, that really does put the ball into the tenants' court, because it means that they're going to get more security, which again, we're fine with. But from a landlord's point of view, the challenge would then be is, well, if the tenant's not paying the rent, if I've got a bad tenant for whatever reason, then how do I get that tenant out? Because sometimes the court process can be an absolute pain in the backside. It could be too elongated. And again, if you've got higher mortgages and you're not receiving that rent, which is in effect the income, then that's not good for you. That's not good for you as a landlord, not good for your landlord business. There needs to be a little bit more give and take. What I will say is that the first 100 days of a new government are normally the most crucial, because it's normally when they get most stuff done. So do expect a barrage of things to be done by this Labour government. Might touch on Great British Energy in a different video, because that is abhorrent at best. But one small favour before we finish this video, please do subscribe to the channel. We're seeing the numbers increase, and that's all thanks to you liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing with your peers. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.